The Truth About Goblins. Chapter 3. Gesturing for her to follow, Bellator led Annie to the large window overlooking the busy market. It was quite a view, with the firefly lights hanging in the trees above and the busy shops teeming with customers down below. She could have stood there for hours, watching the people come and go. "I'm afraid I don't have much time to speak with you," he began. "There are some pressing matters which require my immediate attention, but I'll try my best to explain just as much as I can in this short interview." Annie's mind was whirling. She had so many questions, and now this guy was telling her he didn't have time to answer them. He continued before she could offer a reply. "You asked what this place was," he said. "Well, we do have a name for it." He turned to her, his eyes gleaming with a touch of pride. "We call it the Goblin Market." Goblins? Her curiosity quickly banished her bitterness. "You mean like the fairy tales?" "Yes and no," came his cryptic reply. "The goblins you're familiar with, the ones from fairy tales, well, they really aren't." He struggled to find the right words. "Why don't we start from the beginning?" "Sounds like a good place to start," she said, following as he led the way back to the sofa. He waited until she was seated before speaking again. "So the first thing you should know is that goblins are, well, they're real, more than just stories." Goblins, fairy tale creatures. "Like those little green monsters that sort of..." She was at a loss for words. "Seriously?" This was getting weird. Then again, she was several levels below ground in a secret market she never knew existed. She had a feeling things were only going to get weirder. "I'm sure it sounds ridiculous to you, but please try not to associate those little green monsters with the goblins I'm about to describe. True goblins, purebreds, they are all but extinct by now." He glanced at the window. "In this day and age, they've all interbred." "Interbred with what?" she asked. He chuckled. "Humans." "Gross." "You may feel that way, but I'm only telling you what happened. Did you see all those people out there?" "Don't tell me." Her eyes went wide. "You're not saying they're..." "Goblins," he finished. "Well, part goblin, anyway. We use the term rather loosely nowadays." He shrugged. "Goblins are, for the most part, human, with a small amount of goblin blood. But we call them goblins for simplicity's sake." "But I don't understand. What do they look like? Goblins, I mean." She looked to the window. "How do you know who's a goblin and who's a human?" The question had him stumped. "Visibly, it's difficult. Goblins, even if they're only quarter human or even less, take the same shape as people." He shifted in his seat. "There are times, however, when a particularly stubborn strain of goblin genetics interferes with the normal human appearance. Eye color and sometimes hair." He waved his hand impatiently. "But that's not important right now. There's something else we need to talk about." Not important? Annie thought it was important. Out of nowhere, this guy tells her another species exists on the face of the earth, or beneath it, or whatever. How could he just gloss over the topic like that? But another question surfaced. "What exactly does all this goblin stuff have to do with me?" "Anastasia." He hesitated. "I think you can guess." Oh no. Was this guy serious? "You mean so the little green things, that's..." This was too much. Her gaze dropped to her feet. "Seriously?" His voice took on a softer tone. No, like I said, purebred goblins, your little green monsters, they don't exist anymore." Their eyes met as he tried to reassure her. Your parents were descended from one, is what being a goblin means. It's just that you have a special blood. What did it mean? What could it all mean? Nothing was making sense. Annie didn't understand any of it. In the confusion of the moment, her mind drifted back to the two bodies back above ground, still waiting to be identified at the morgue. My parents. Understanding dawned on her. They weren't my real parents. No, they weren't, he said. Just as you are not the real Anastasia Green. I knew it, she said, though her voice was laced with disbelief. I knew it all along. Back at the morgue, they asked me. Her eyes met his once again. I knew they weren't my real parents. How did I know? That would be another detail, he said. As a goblin, it's not unusual to have such, feelings towards your identity, or heritage, if you'd rather. Wait, what? She frowned. Say that last part again. He gave a weary sigh. I really don't have time to explain that bit. What is important is that you were exchanged with another when you were very young. Reluctantly, he added, You're a changeling. Annie went silent. The conversation had been leading up to this. She should have known it was coming. But she was still unprepared for the blow. Elbows on her knees, she hung her head and tried to take it in. Changeling. She closed her eyes. I was switched. Well... He tried to agree without sounding callous. Simply put, yes. The real Anastasia Green is living here at the moment, in the market. He rose from his chair and walked back to the desk. I believe she's staying where the old herb garden used to be, over some sort of shop. Opening a drawer, he pulled out an old photograph. He gave it to her and added, I would go to her if I were you. She'll have the answers you're looking for. It's her secret to tell, in the end. I'm sure she'll want you to know. The girl in the photograph had blonde hair like her, except not like her. Just normal blonde hair, gold instead of white. The picture itself must have been taken a few years back, because the girl looked too young to be her changeling. Who is she? Said Annie, still in a daze. She goes by the name that was once yours, he said. Saphira Lazuli. Saphira Lazuli, she repeated, tasting the name on her lips. Now that she said it out loud, she felt that it really had been her real name. She felt that it was still her real name, just like the feeling that those two dead bodies in the morgue were not her parents. Was it normal to have these feelings? Was it normal for a goblin? Someone knocked at the door. Bellator marched over and opened it just a crack. A woman's voice, a whisper, drifted in from the other side. We found him. His grip tightened on the edge of the door. You can't mean... He cast a nervous glance towards Annie and lowered his voice. He's actually here. She nodded, following his gaze to the sofa. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet that Annie couldn't hear her at all. But nothing from Donovan, she continued. Not a word. He was silent for a long moment. That's not good. Not good. She clenched her teeth. Is that all you can say? You know something must have happened, or we would have heard from him by now. Yes. He looked to the sofa a second time before turning back to the door. I understand. Give me another minute here and we'll continue. She said nothing and nodded once more, though her eyes betrayed her frustration. Just 1 minute, he promised, closing the door. When he turned to Annie, his face was very pale. I'm afraid I have to end this here. What? She exclaimed, jumping to her feet. You can't just throw this all on me without... She tried to keep calm, but the stress was too much to handle. Without explaining it first. I don't know where I am, or who I am, or what to do, or anything. How am I supposed to get back home? I would advise against leaving the market, he said. We believe the death of your adopted parents was no accident. It's likely that someone is after Anastasia Green, and even if you're not actually her, there's a good chance the killer will be looking for you. He paused, regretting his use of words. But of course, that would all be above ground. You're safe as long as you stay in the market. But why is someone after me? What did I do? Why was I switched in the first place? This was it. This was just too much. And what do you mean, we? Who's we? I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He went over to the desk and wrote up a hasty note. This is a bad time. I'm in the thick of possibly the most... He shook his head. No, it is the most important investigation of my career. We can't afford to wait, not now. I can answer more questions for you, but later. He handed her the envelope, clasping her hands in his and leading her to the door. When you need to come back here, ask for the Arbiter's Tower. Showing her out, he pointed to the envelope. And give that to Kitsune. He'll give you a rundown of the place. She wanted to say something, to argue, to scream out of frustration, but she didn't know what to say or what to scream. She felt abandoned. Bellator, sensing her despair, stepped forward and embraced her. Startled, she said nothing, and although it didn't change anything or answer any of her questions, the hug was oddly comforting. Come back to see me. He gently pushed her out of the room. I'm sorry to have put you through this. Annie wasn't sure what he meant, but she wasn't about to find out. The mysterious woman brushed past her, entering the room and closing the door in her face. The heavy barrier allowed no sound to pass through to her, but she couldn't have cared less about the discussion inside. Her mind was already miles away. To say she was confused would have been an understatement. Nothing was making any sense. And yet, frustrating as it was, she didn't want it to make sense. She still didn't understand what happened, still didn't understand where she was. And what was all that about goblins? She glanced at the envelope in her hand. Bellator had told her to give it to Kitsune. Kit, the guy with the orange hair. Where did he go? She looked around the hallway, alone aside from the guard standing near the staircase. Excuse me, she said, approaching the sentinel. Did you see where that kid went? The one with the... The guard nodded and pointed to the top of the staircase, silent. Thanks. What was up with this place? Why did everyone have to act so mysterious all the time? Bellator had called it the Arbiter's Tower. Were these people supposed to be arbiters? She stepped past the guard and headed towards the stairs. Hesitating at the first step, she turned her gaze upwards. Even with the torches on the wall to light the way, the tower was still very dark. From where she stood, it almost seemed as if there was no end in sight, as if the steps continued onward forever. But Annie knew there had to be an end to it. Pushing her hesitation aside, she began the climb. Step by step, she rose up the tower, taking in her surroundings as she made her way to the top. Passing by closed doors on the way, she wondered what was behind them. Was this place like a police station, but underground? She stifled a groan. So many questions, and no one to ask. She hoped Kit would be able to help. Although, if she was perfectly honest with herself, Annie didn't like the idea of depending on that kid for anything. Nearly tripping over the last step, she came to a sudden halt. The stairs had ended, the ground leveling out into the final floor of the tower. Looking up from her feet, her eyes came to rest on a ladder just ahead, leading to an opening in the ceiling. She knew it had to lead to the roof. Was that where Kit was waiting? This time she didn't hesitate. Striding across the room, she grasped the rungs of the ladder and pulled herself up, the end of her short journey in sight. She wondered what she would find on the other side. A cool breeze surged past her. It was a strange sensation, considering she was underground. But it didn't stop her from breathing in the fresh air. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes scanning the expanse of the tower. She found him within seconds, not too far ahead of her. Standing by the edge of the tower, Kit leaned against the thick stone wall overlooking the market, his keen eyes surveying the sight below. She walked over and pulled up beside him. Way up at the top of the tower, they overlooked the underground treetops and firefly lights. Down below, the market was approaching its peak, with people crowding over the many shops and stands as they browsed the collection of goods for sale. Despite the confusion she was experiencing, Annie couldn't help but feel that same desire to go down and investigate all that was on display. But instead, she only stood in awe. The Goblin Market. The Goblin Market, repeated Kit. Home sweet home. You live here? What would it be like to live in a place like this? No sun, no sky, no cars. It was a completely different world. Yup, he replied, popping his lips. They both stood in silence for a long while, neither of them saying a word. It was at least a minute before Annie spoke again. So, she began, you're a goblin too, right? He chuckled. Well, duh. He turned to her with a goofy smile on his face, but it vanished in an instant. Holy crap! You don't know about goblins? She was back on the defensive. I think that's pretty obvious. But... He was reeling. You don't know about anything, like, at all. He looked out over the tower, stunned. You don't know about goblins, or the market, or magic, or gold, or... Whoa, wait just a minute. She stared at him. Magic. Did you just say magic? You're not telling me. But he was laughing, and he couldn't stop. Man, are you ever in for a ride? How old are you anyway? How could you live your whole life and not know about the market? Hey, it's not my fault. She wanted to say she was a changeling, but couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. She groaned. You know what? I don't have to deal with you anymore. Sullenly, she turned away, but just as she was about to go down the ladder, she remembered the note. She pulled it out of her pocket and stuffed it in Kit's face. Still laughing, he grabbed the envelope. What's this? From that guy down there, she said, turning to leave. Bellator, he corrected, watching as she made her way down. Once she was back at the stairs, Annie felt the seeds of anxiety settle in again. There she was, in a strange place in the middle of the night, alone. She knew how to get out of the Arbiter's Tower. That part was easy enough. But then what? Where would she go afterwards? Pulling out the photo from her jean pocket, she took another look at her changeling. Saphira Lazuli, the old herb garden. But where exactly was the old herb garden anyway? How was she supposed to find it? Whatever. She stuffed the photo back in her pocket. She would ask someone. She didn't feel comfortable talking to any of the arbiters, but maybe some of the market goers would be more approachable. Hopefully that girl, Saphira, would have some answers. Slipping past the heavy door, Annie was overwhelmed the moment she stepped outside. The crowds were incredible. Like a strong tide, the mass of people threatened to sweep her up in the confusion without so much as a warning. Her courage evaporated. Strangers swarmed around her. Seconds after she stepped onto the street, her head started to spin. Her vision blurred, colors blending together like carnival lights on a chaotic merry-go-round. The noise made it worse. The frantic crowd buzzed around her, her thoughts drowned out by their voices. The colors began to fade, the darkness eating away at the corners of her eyes and threatening to take over. She tried to catch her breath and concentrate, but it was too much. She was going to black out. Someone grabbed her arm. Dazed, she made no move to resist as she was dragged past the throng of unfamiliar faces. Gradually, the faintness lifted, though it wasn't until she was sitting down, safe and sound in a remote alcove of the market, that she could hear herself think. "You okay?" Kit stood over her, confused. She moaned, only half glad to see him. "What happened?" He gave a low whistle. "You looked pretty shaky out there. Midnight's when it's busiest. Usually it's best to stay out of the market till at least 1. Annie looked around. There was a canopy above them, belonging to a stall to the right of where they sat. Exactly what they were sitting on, she didn't know. They felt like beanbags, but looked like baskets. And just in front of where they sat was a great open view of the market. It was strange, being in a peaceful corner while surrounded by such fervent activity. She closed her eyes and leaned back, grateful for the chance to breathe. Something cold touched her leg. Opening her eyes, she saw a canteen pressed against her ankle. "Want some water?" She took the bottle and gulped it down. It tasted sweet, not like the water she was used to, but it did the job. "Thanks," she said, handing it back. She noticed Bellator's note in one of Kit's hands and frowned. "What did it say?" He chuckled and glanced over the letter. Bellator. He says that in exchange for letting the incident with the golf cart slip, I'm to look after you, make sure you integrate into the market without too many bumps or bruises." "Now wait just a minute," she said, standing from her seat. "I don't need—" Obviously you do," he said. "Not only have you never been to the market, you don't even know a thing about goblins. Like, at all." She fell back in her seat, defeated. He was right, of course. She hadn't lasted 2 minutes. She needed someone's help. It was just a shame that it had to be from someone like Kit. Kit and his smug little smirk. He seemed to be enjoying her confusion in the most obnoxious way. "I'm officially your tour guide," he announced, jumping to his feet. "I'll show you the ropes, kid. Soon you'll know everything there is to know about the goblin market." "I'm not a kid." As he pulled her to her feet, she added, "Where are we going, anyway?" "Our first stop," he said, "will be the old herb garden. You're looking for someone named Saphira, right?" Hi, I'm your narrator, Miranda Eastwood, also the author of The Truth About Goblins. If you liked this chapter, remember to add, follow, or subscribe to this channel so you can hear the next one. And if you didn't like this chapter, oh well, I can't really do anything about that. In any case, I just thought I'd let you know about my Patreon. You can check it out if you'd like to throw some support my way. It would mean a lot to me. Not to mention there's loads of extra exclusive content that I only post on Patreon. While I'm at it, I'll mention that The Truth About Goblins is now available as a complete audiobook, and you can get it wherever you get your audiobooks. Thanks for listening.